Hello and welcome to Q Plus EDU 2021. Tonight, I am joined by three fabulous panelists who are going to share with us how they use their powers for good. My name is Rin Gonzalez. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I'm the Operations and Programs Director at Out Youth. I will ask if our panelists, oh good, cameras work. Excellent. Oh, and it looks like Frederick is here too. So to get us started tonight, let's go around and do introductions, which are a tradition here at Out Youth, where when we gather together, we go around and say things like our name, our age, our pronouns, answer a question of the day. That's so that we all know how everyone is showing up on a particular day. Because the question that I am going to ask you is long, I'm going to put it in chat for all of you. So I'm going to go around. I will call on you, so you don't have to do the weird Zoom rock, paper, scissors. We'll ask you your name, pronouns, age, where you're from, how you identify within the LGBTQIA+ community, and if you will, please give us a physical description of yourself for blind or visually impaired attendees or folks who are joining us by phone. We'll begin with Ashley.
Hi, how are you? I'm Ashley Walker. I go by she, her, hers. I am a 32-year-old mom who's heterosexual, cisgender Black woman. I'm from Round Rock, Texas, and I'm a member, an activist, and an advocate in the community of Round Rock.
Thank you, Ashley. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Capastaci. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the clinical director of Out Youth and live in Austin. I am a queer cisgender person, and I'm just really happy to be here tonight. I have curly brown hair and I'm wearing a blue dress. I hope that works for the visual description.
It does. Thank you, Sarah. And Suzanne.
Hello, my name is Suzanne Kearns. My pronouns are she, her, and I've lived in Austin for the past 10 years, but I moved here from Seattle and grew up in Southern Idaho. I am an ally of the LGBTQIA+ community. And as far as how I'm looking today, it's pretty much the dictionary definition of a generic cishet middle-aged white woman, almost 50, not quite. Except for I think I've got the curly, frizzier hair than the most generic of us.
Frederick.
Hey y'all, I'm Frederick. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am Out Youth's Texas Gender and Sexuality Alliance Network Coordinator. I am just here to thank y'all for joining us for Q Plus EDU 2021 to provide tech support. I will have my camera off for the rest of this so we have an even number of boxes on the screen because a little particular. I'm not going to be participating. Let's see, what were the other questions? I wrote the questions. I should know what they are. How you identify within the community. Age, where you're from. Okay. I am 36. I'm originally from California, but I've been in Austin for about 12 years at this point. I am a bisexual genderqueer person, and I am white. I have shoulder-ish length, long, straight blonde hair, and I'm wearing a red shirt and brand new black glasses.
And my name is Rin Gonzalez. I am 36. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I am from Texas and refuse to go anywhere else, no matter what the Texas legislature tells me to do, because they're not the boss of me. Within the LGBTQIA+ community, I am one of those people who is probably very guilty of just calling myself gay or queer and hoping other people just figure it out. though as the youth and drop-in last week informed me, I can definitely declare my gender identity as gender in this economy. Physical description of myself: I am white, sometimes translucent, depending on how much sunlight I have exposed myself to. I am currently bald, shaved head. I am wearing a peach-colored shirt with a tan jacket over it, which the youth also complimented me on today. Thank you, youth. And we will dive in for questions. Because we are on Zoom, I will call on each of you in turn to make sure that we're not having Zoom collisions. At the same time, though, if you have something that you want to add or if you want to go in a different direction, just let me know, either out loud or in the chat. We'll begin by asking you to please tell us about your child or your children. You can include as much or as little detail as you and they are comfortable sharing. Start with Suzanne.
Wonderful. I have a 16-year-old cishet female daughter who is starting her junior year of high school this year. And then I have an 11-year-old cishet male son who is starting his first year of middle school in 6th grade this year. And we all strive to be fierce allies and use our cishet privilege just to really create safer spaces for LGBTQI plus students in schools and in our home. People are often surprised that I started a group called Informed Parents of Austin to advocate for LGBTQ students, since as far as I'm aware currently, I do not have any students of my own who identify as LGBTQIA, but I just feel like it is important for all parents, not just someone who is directly impacted by policies, to care about our community in this way.
Thank you, Suzanne. Sarah.
I'm coming to you as a parent and a clinician. So I will say that I have a 9-year-old kiddo who, as far as we know, is cis. Sexuality is, I think a little bit pending. Was very influenced by the television program She-Ra, which had great LGBTQ representation, which I'm really happy about and proud of. So I'm coming here tonight as a parent, certainly, of a young kiddo, but also hopefully as a good ally and advocate as the clinical director of Out Youth. I provide counseling services to a variety of youth and adults throughout the LGBTQIA spectrum, and I really feel like there's a lot of wonderful advocacy we can do to create safe spaces in schools. So I'm really happy to be here tonight talking about this subject in particular.
And thank you for wearing both of those hats for us tonight. I know it's not always easy to juggle multiple identities at once. And we'll move on to Ashley. Tell us about your kid or kiddos.
I have one daughter. As far as we know right now, she's cis. She's 6 years old and going into the 1st grade. We'll be doing virtual learning yet again this year. Yeah, that's about it about her. She's active, very active as a 6-year-old, obviously.
They tend to be. And then they never really slow down, in my experience, now that we've expanded the age range at Out Youth downward to 9, and will likely expand downward again at some point. Yeah, they're just always all over the place. So, Sarah, I'm gonna move back to you. What was your first experience advocating for your child at their school like? What prompted you to do so? And what kind of response did you get from the school? Or, given both your hats, what is it like to do that from a professional standpoint?
Sure, I'll go ahead and share from both perspectives. So I'll start from the personal perspective. I will say that I'm allowed to disclose that I'm married to a trans man, and he actually went through some of his gender affirmation process while our kiddo, Hadley, was in preschool and kind of moving into early elementary school. So we've really tried to be really affirming of Hadley's ability to, be proud of us as a family as she's moved through her educational experience, but also really taught her about, you don't have to answer certain questions and certain things are allowed to be private. And so teaching her to advocate for herself in those ways. We've also tried to influence little things by talking to folks at her school, really encouraging them to, for example, you don't need to separate kiddos when you're going to the bathroom into a girls line and a boys line. Like, you can really just use eye color. Like, that's just as easy. Why don't we just do that? So really trying to infuse those little tips with any teachers or administrators that we come into contact with. So that's part of the advocacy we've done. Personally as parents. And then I will say professionally, because primarily I've worked with, middle school and high school students who've been at various schools in Central Texas, have done some advocacy around calling assistant principals to talk about bathroom access. Luckily, I haven't had to do that in a little while, which I'm grateful for. But we also do things at our agency, and I've done things like write letters to particular teachers or to the administration of a school saying, this is this kid's name, and these are their pronouns. You need to be using this name and these pronouns because that's what's going to be beneficial to their mental health. And here's what we know about what happens to a youth's mental health when you don't use their name and you don't use their pronouns. So those are some examples of some advocacy that we've tried to do for kiddos just to help them feel affirmed in their day-to-day school life.
Thanks, Sarah. I do want to give a shout out to our friends at the ACLU of Texas. We had Audrey Perez on last week to talk about using the media to get your story out. And Out Youth has also partnered with the ACLU of Texas to do things like Sarah is mentioning, to gently or not so gently encourage schools to do the right thing. Let's move over to Suzanne. Please tell us about your kid or kiddos and, oh no, sorry. What was your first experience advocating for your child at their school? What prompted you to do so and what kind of response did you get?
Well, it coincidentally was exactly 4 years ago today when we started the Informed Parents of Austin group. And the real intent of it was not to be this big advocacy group. It was because there was a group of we call them they're anti-everything. So anti-sex ed, anti-LGBTQ group was trying to do this big presentation where they were going to tell everybody how AISD was indoctrinating students into the LGBTQ lifestyle because of the new proposed sex ed curriculum, which has since passed unanimously through the SHAC and through the AISD school board. But at the time, 4 years ago, they were going to be having this meeting and everybody was like, do we go out and do we, protest? Do we have our own alternate meeting? What should we do? What's the best use of our time? And actually a friend who became a friend out of this from HRC actually gave me great advice that was, instead of fighting against them, let's fight for something. And so we did. We had an alternate offsite presentation. I didn't know what I didn't know. It was my first time ever trying to help out. I was kind of a stumbling, bumbling ally. But we had this meeting, and because of that, I met a bunch of great people in the community and decided, this is more than just one meeting. We need to make sure that we have these people at the ready for any type of activation that we need to do throughout the district. So, it took over 2 years to get this sex ed proposed. I actually became a member of this SHAC. I went on the board, which is the School Health Advisory Council in Texas. That's the group that actually has to propose sex ed to the school board in order to get it to move forward. And that's one thing I would tell all parents. Anybody can join. Well, they have to be accepted, but anybody can apply to join their SHAC board in their school district. And that is the number one place where you can be at the forefront of making recommendations about LGBTQ inclusive sex ed for your school district. Unfortunately, because we're in Texas, there's a new Senate bill, HB, I think it was 1525, has a bunch of new requirements about SHAC and sex ed now, which I'll probably be talking a little bit more about. But one of the other things was around Pride Week. When my daughter, like I said, she's not in the LGBTQ community, but she's a fierce ally too. And she came home and told me that her middle school a few years ago was not going to be doing Pride, the AISD Pride Week. They just weren't going to take part of it. So again, through using that community, that group that we can just automatically mobilize whenever we need to, that and the neighborhood Facebook group, we were able to get them to do. It was pretty not great, but a last minute Pride initiative. But it helped us go to the board and really press forward on this idea that there's not a true bare minimum that is expected out of principals and individual schools, and they're given a lot of freedom for what they want to do for Pride. So we now have every year a partnership with AISD. Well, we work on their behalf, helping get out Pride packs to every single school district. So every school has stickers, flags, all kinds of stuff for kiddos, and has no excuse to not participate fully in every Pride.
I do have a follow-up question for you. Do you have to be a parent of a student in your school district in order to join a shack?
You do not, actually. It is open to community members as well. So yes, that is something, anybody who is interested in being, having a voice in fact, I believe there has to be some board members who are not parents, who are community members that give the voice to the community. So yes, if anybody is interested in making sure that their voice is heard, get involved, sign up for that. They're all across every school district in Texas has a shack. And if you go to, we've got a section on the Informed Parents of Austin site that talks about what shacks are, links to the shacks for all of the different school districts in the Austin area, and gives you some more information about what that covers.
Thanks, Suzanne. Ashley, tell us about your experience advocating in schools for your kiddo.
I started advocating for her last year at the beginning of her kindergarten year when I went through her school's list of teachers and I saw that not one of them looked like my daughter. And so then I had a bunch of questions for the school at that time. And after that, I quickly joined the local PTA for my school. And then from there, I joined the school advisory committee as well. So I was able to have communications with the principal on a regular basis about things that was going on around the school. And at that time, I started to realize, it's not just a race thing, it's a every other thing you can think of thing as well, right? So in my PTA began the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I was the chair of that last year. Unfortunately, won't be this year due to COVID, but I was the chair of that, and we had, as a part of our initiative, the Gender Sexual Alliance, and I wanted to make sure that we protected students who were a part of the LGBTQIA community. And we did that first by something so simple, but for some reason they had the supplies lists gendered. For some reason it was boy, girl lists, and I didn't understand it. And so, of course, after raising a stink, basically, I was able to get them to change it from gendered to now everybody has the same list. There was really no reason to have different lists in the first place. And although I'm not a part of the PTA this year, I still plan on being a part of the school's advisory committee. So I still have contact with the principal, and any changes that I think need to be made, I definitely advocate for those.
The things that we will gender for no apparent reason. And thank you for raising a stink. At least in my experience, working at Out Youth for 15 years, like most of the time, the reason that these dumb things continue to happen is just that nobody's asked the question. Like everyone looks at it as like, that's dumb, but then nobody asks. So thanks for asking and doing all the other things. Suzanne, what have you been most successful at changing at your child's school? Or in the context of Informed Parents of Austin, what have you been most successful in changing at all the schools that you've touched?
Yeah, I think the main things are, of course, the sex ed. So, what the sex ed curriculum that I was referring to applies to grades 3 through 8. And like I said, that was voted on and voted forward in unanimously by all the board members 2 years ago. Because of COVID and just the way that things have staggered out, it still has not been taught to kids. It's really unfortunate because, and I understand the technicalities. We have the privilege of having separate learning areas for each of our kids at different grade levels, but not all families do. And so there was just the concern that because there are different lessons for different age appropriate grade levels, they just didn't want anybody getting anything too soon, which I appreciate, even though it was so frustrating. So this year is supposed to be the year that that finally happens. But I had mentioned that House Bill 1525, one of the most important things that I hope people get out of this or to take forward and spread the word, sex ed now across all of Texas because of this bill is opt-in. So it used to be that if you were one of the, based on the survey of about 5,500 parents a couple years ago, the AISD did across basically all of the sex education standard, national standards, each one of those individual granular elements, about 97+% of parents said they wanted it for their kids at various grade levels. So the 3% of people who did not want it then would just opt out. They would fill out the form and their kids would go do another social emotional learning activity during that period. But because of this bill, and it is something that a lot of the groups have been fighting for a long time, is to make people opt in, which is really scary because you think of the people who, LGBTQ issues aside, kids who are subject to abuse, sexual abuse, if their abuser is in their household, those are not going to be the people who opt their children into health education and sex education. So it's a tragedy, really. But since I am on the shack, I heard at our last meeting that instead of having it be an opt-in for sex ed, there's just going to be a sex ed form that everybody gets, and it's either opt-in, opt-out. So teachers will then have a tally of, if there's 5 kids who they haven't received their form for, they won't just assume that they have opted out. They'll be able to follow up and see if it's opt-in, opt-out. So I really appreciate that AISD had that extra step of saying, okay, you're going to make us opt-in. Well, you're going to have to opt out too. Everybody has to do something. So that's good. But the thing is, parents for years and years who've had their kids in AISD are going to go into this year thinking that everything's normal, and not know that they have to do this special thing in order for their kids to get the basic. I mean, we're talking, it's wonderful that we have the inclusive elements in the curriculum now, but we're talking about just menstruation, basic, well, they weren't even teaching basic body part names before, but it was just the true bare minimum of the information that you think that your kids are getting in school, they won't be getting unless you opt in for it. So that is a huge thing. And then just our ongoing pride initiatives and trying to make sure that each school and each principal is held to, I hate to even call it a bare minimum, but just held to a standard of making sure that their school is celebrating pride, and not thinking that the district will not notice. And I just wanted to also throw back to Ashley. She had mentioned the PTA and the CAC, the Campus Advisory Council. I just 2 thumbs up for parents who are trying to figure out where they can have the most impact. I think most people think, oh, PTA, that's the one we all hear of. But the Campus Advisory Council is the group that basically has the principal's ear. That is the principal's advisory council for all of the issues that touch that school or what they're seeing around the district. Again, I don't want to take anybody from the PTA because they do amazing things too. And I love that more PTAs are actually getting the funds and stuff for some of these diversity and inclusion groups. But if you are talking about like procedural processes, policies of the school, the campus advisory council, you don't even have to serve on the board. They have a public portion of the meeting where you can go in and just do like your 2-minute spiel and speak and make sure that the board hears you. So yeah, I'm really excited that Ashley's part of that, or was part of that group. I know that our availabilities as parents when it comes to mixing homeschool during COVID, it gets a little stretched then, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware what that acronym and what that group did, because each school has one and they're incredibly important and very misunderstood or just not even known about.
Suzanne, would you agree that part of the reason that they're not known about or not talked about is intentional?
It potential, I would just say it depends on the school. Some schools that I have worked with, I mean, they'll offer food, they'll offer beverages, they're offering childcare, like, please just come be involved. I do think that there are some schools, there's one that one of my kids went to that I think they kind of had their people, and they would just, every year they would almost do this like baton handoff to the people that were like them. And I gotta say, one of our PTAs, I don't even think it's kind of those nice white people or the Nice White Parents podcast. I don't even think it was intentional, but if you are contacting your friends to take over your chair the next year and your friends are a bunch of white suburban ladies like you are, your PTA is going to continue to look like that. So one of the things that I said on my going out of our PTA was that we need to throw the net wide, and we need to offer not incentives, but just the ability to show up at some of these meetings. They were set up during the school day. That does not work for working parents. There was no childcare typically available. That does not work for single parent households. And also the fact that things were just kind of passed on, they would put it to the person who held that role to find someone to fill that role, instead of just doing a wide net to the whole school saying, hey, this role is available. So yeah, I don't know if it's intentional, but it's definitely not proactively done in the other way to make sure that people are aware of it.
Thanks for that clarification, Suzanne. I didn't mean to imply that all schools were trying to do that, but
there are some. There
definitely are some, and Sarah and I have worked with them. But that is always the question that comes up. I'm preparing for another board meeting I'm attending tonight, and one of the things we continue to hear is, I didn't even know that existed in Austin. It's like, well, it's been around for 5 years. Why haven't you heard about it?
I didn't know what a shack was until I was on the board of it.
Exactly. So there's a lot more communication, I think, that needs to be done about all of these things. Sarah, what have you been most successful at changing at your child's school? Or alternatively, or in addition, up to you, you get to do whatever you want. What's been the most fun thing that you've changed at somebody else's school?
Absolutely, yeah. So mentioning the PTA, one wonderful coincidence last year, or no, it was 2 years ago, was invited by the PTA to do some parent and staff education around LGBTQIA issues. And it just happens to be the middle school my kiddo is tracked to go to. So that felt really good that the school invited us in very proactively. And we were able to do a presentation and talk about inclusion for LGBTQIA students. And, we really love doing that, doing some of that education And I'm really proud now that we have the Be a Beacon program for staff. And if folks don't know, Be a Beacon is a wonderful program you can access online with modules about how to create a really safe and wonderful school environment. So I'm glad that we now have that available to folks who want to take part in that. Also happy though at the invitation of a PTA to come and talk to parents. I've done that at a couple of local elementary schools as well, and that's always been really fun to talk to parents and try and talk about the culture of the school and changing that in those ways. I will say another thing we do at Out Youth is we do offer psychoeducational support groups at area middle and high schools for LGBTQIA students. And I think what's powerful about that is that we were doing some of this work at a local middle school, and the person who invited us to do this group was very transparent with me when we started the group about 5 years ago, saying that this school is not very affirming. Like from teachers to students on down, like we just have a lot of work to do. And I was like, that's fine. Like, that's why we want to be here. Like, we really want to build a culture through the kiddos. And we also marketed the group to allies, not just folks who identified as LGBTQ. One, to make it safe for folks to feel like they could attend the group under the cover of I'm an ally, even if, you know, that wasn't the case or they were exploring their identity. And two, I feel like we really created some ally leaders in that group who were able to then go into the larger school community and, you know, be influential in those ways. And the beautiful thing about this, to kind of piggyback on what Suzanne was saying and to thank you, is that a couple of years after that, fast forward like 3 years from then, because AISD was rolling out this big initiative for Pride Week, that middle school actually ran a rainbow flag up their flagpole. And that's huge. That was a really big deal for that particular school to be able to do that. And it was lovely to be able to, you know, be a small part of that kind of at the grassroots level, but then having the leadership from the district level was also really helpful on that particular campus. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of advocacy, which is a hot topic right now, is letting transgender kids play sports in school and everywhere else. As folks are probably aware, during the regular session, the first special session, and now the second special session, there is a bill trying to ban trans kids from playing sports in accordance with their gender identity, which is really a, you know, solution in search of a problem. We know that most Texans and most parents really value equality. And, you know, really want to support any youth who wants to play a sport because of the physical benefits and the social benefits. So just wanted to do a plug. There's a lot of ways to get involved with that type of advocacy. Equality Texas has been doing a lot to organize over all these sessions about ways you can get involved. And so this is definitely an issue that affects students that I just wanted to mention is kind of in the air right now. And we can use all the allies we can get to help promote defeating these types of bills, especially when there's a lot of other issues Texans care about happening right now in this state that we should actually be focusing on. So wanted to mention that too.
Very much agreed, Sarah. I saw a message go out today about the special session and how folks find it very interesting that our hospital system is taxed right now because of the Delta variant of COVID, and asked a very simple question. If the state is so focused on trans student athletes, what's going to happen when the power grid fails and all of those ventilators go offline? Very much misplaced priorities. I will also do a shameless plug. I will be at Austin FC next Wednesday morning for a Pride in Sports panel, probably named that thing entirely wrong, where one of the things I'm bringing to the table is not only this conversation about trans youth in sports, which, let's be very honest, they're not really talking about trans boys in sports. They're talking about trans girls in sports. And nobody's talking about non-binary kids in sports. What does the non-binary kid do? So we'll be talking all about that next Wednesday, and I believe it's being recorded. So even if you cannot attend, we will make sure to share that out on our social media to Out Youth. If you are passionate about trans and non-binary youth and their ability to do all the sports with the things. I didn't do sports, as you can tell. Move on to Ashley. Ashley, I'm intensely curious to know, you did a ton of advocacy. What outcomes have you seen in your school? What has been the most successful in your efforts?
Compared to the other ladies, I would say mine is pretty small with the change of the supplies list. But it was big to me because I think from the beginning, and especially being in an elementary school, they don't want to talk about it. This is a subject that we don't want to mention. It's taboo, and a lot of people don't think that it's appropriate in the elementary age. And so my advocacy is making sure that we have the conversations, because I do know, and I'm still learning, but I do know a lot of kids know from very early ages who they are. And so to hide this conversation, to hide who people are, I don't think is beneficial to anyone. And so I speak at school board meetings. I organize people within the community through different organizations I'm a part of as well. Write letters to the school board, write letters to the governor, whatever needs to be done. That's what I try to help get done, so that we can make sure that everybody has a voice, everybody is heard, and everybody is seen. In my district, there was a particular story that was going around where a child had just recently come out as a part of the LGBTQIA community, and they were drawing rainbows on the playground, and a teacher saw them and took the chalk away from them. And then the principal decided that no one gets to play with chalk because it was a misuse of the chalk at school. And so I tried to advocate for that family to make sure that, that's not okay. Kids can be who they want to be, and we need to be affirming in that. And, I just, like I said, I want to make sure everyone is heard. That's my biggest thing. I want to make sure they're seen. And so I'm going to continue to, even through this year of COVID, again, COVID plus, I'm going to continue to do everything that I can, including the more letters, more calls, more going to the Capitol to speak. I've done that as well, just to make sure that I know people are hearing who we are and we're taking up the space that needs to be taken up.
I'm going to do a direct follow-up to that, Ashley, that's not on the list because I think it's really important. One, actually, I'm going to do two because I'm allowed. I'm the one with the microphone right now. Yay. Changing that supply list may seem small to some, but I can tell you that as a young trans non-binary kid, that would have been huge. I would have gotten that list and gone, I don't know which of these lists I'm supposed to use. So that's going to have ripple effects forever. Second, you mentioned that you are actually doing some of the hardest things, which is the writing the letters, making the calls, going to the meetings. I think a lot of people want to do those things, but are intimidated by the process. Can you talk a little bit about how you got started and what you've learned as part of doing that kind of direct outreach of sending these messages and speaking in public that you would tell somebody that is interested but doesn't really know where to start?
First, I'd say try to find a community of like-minded people. So I've began working with an organization that's now been renamed as Anti-Racist Coming Together Act. And we started letter writing campaigns to the school board. And then now it's a trickle effect. We're doing more and more within our community, but as well as within state politics. And we are battling the governor if we have to at this point, especially with this mask mandate. I'm also a part of an organization called Round Rock Black Parents Association. So we specifically fight for Black families within the community to ensure that they are being heard as well. especially with disproportionalities that happen with Black students who are 9% of the population in our schools and yet make up about 25% of the arrests. We want to be able to advocate for those families. And so if you find a group that you are like-minded with and get into those, letter writing, I think, is the easiest of all, because you literally type out what you believe in and send it. It's the public speaking aspect for me that's a little harder. I had to go to the Capitol to advocate against the bill that is taking away the civics studies for kids in schools and learning about history, and talking to a whole bunch of senators at that point in time was nerve-wracking. But the more I did it, the more comfortable I became in it. And so I think that's the thing. Just as soon as you get into it, it's nerve-wracking. It can be, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And then the louder your voice becomes. And now I take up space wherever I am, in order to make sure that I'm not only heard, but those who I represent are heard in that moment.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm going to add one thing to that because it drives me up a wall. And Suzanne knows what I'm talking about because we sat there in all board meetings. Yes, this piece of public speaking, especially speaking before a school board or a House or Senate committee, when people go up and say, "Thank you for allowing me to speak today." No. They have to, one, and two, they work for you. Don't be thinking people that work for you. It drives me crazy. I have a whole, and I think Sarah knows this, I brought this up at staff meeting once. I have a whole group of contacts in my phone that's labeled people who work for me. And it starts from the President of the United States and it works all the way down to probably like school board, county commissioner. Yeah. You gotta remember who these people work for, that you are not putting them out by going and speaking your mind. You are allowed to, because it's a democracy. In the same vein, I'm gonna go over to Suzanne. What issues are you still working on? I know that there's a lot going on at the legislature, but aside from what you've spoken about, what is the work on the ground for informed parents right now that you're trying to do, and maybe despite or in spite of COVID?
Well, yeah, there's a lot. The darn special sessions, just nothing ever seems to go away. You think that we finally made it through one session. And we've had a couple of our members who've been particularly active. Some of the anti-trans sports bills, it's, when we talk about privilege, it is a privilege, first of all, to live this close to Austin, where we have the ability, where it's not putting us out hotel rooms to have to stay overnight. I was fortunate to be able to testify against a bill during the last session 2 years ago. But the next bill that I went to go speak on, it was supposed to come up at 10 a.m. So I sat there at 10 a.m. until 1, until 2. Finally, I had to run back across town, take my daughter to an orthodontist appointment. I had to go to a shack meeting that night. And then someone called and said, "Okay, it's finally," it was 8 o'clock at night. They said, "The bill's finally being heard. So I rushed across to the Capitol, got there. And when I got there, they said, "Oh, well, they decided just to let 5 people from each side speak." And I cannot even imagine what that is like for someone who has crossed state, who's driven 8 hours to get here, paid for a hotel room, sat in there all night, and then wasn't able to be heard. So I just, and again, and I also want to throw back to something that Ashley was saying, is that going and speaking at the Capitol is not something that I would have dreamed for myself 4 years ago. I was having nervous tummy going to those shack meetings. And for those first 6 months or so, I would just go in front of the shack, which was like 10 people, and I would just speak for 2 minutes and it wasn't even trying to make a big case. It was just like, I support LGBTQ students and I support sex ed. And like that was basically it. I didn't have any statistics. I didn't have anything fancy to say. And I would literally pretty much just go every month and say the same thing. So, and then, after doing that several times, then I was like, okay, hey, I'm going to throw in some stuff, or hey, I'm ready. And it was probably a year of that before I felt comfortable going to a school board meeting, because those are really intimidating for someone who doesn't like public speaking necessarily. So I just want to make, I mean, hats off to Ashley for going. Those are the big things. You said you're not doing big things. Those are big things. When we ask stuff of the informed parents of Austin, we just know that there's probably the same 5 to 10 people out of our group of 1,700 who are going to do, 90% of the things. But then it's funny when you ask for, you hate to ask for money, but sometimes when you ask for money, you get this big outpouring because they're like, that's my thing I feel comfortable with. Or if you ask someone to show up somewhere, on a weekend, maybe they can't do it during the week because of work. That's their thing. So it's just knowing that there's like 100 different ways that people are comfortable in interacting and helping support whatever community you're trying to support. It's just, you just never know what someone's thing's going to be, that when all of a sudden you're like, who's this person? They're like, oh, I've been in the group for 2 years, but selling t-shirts is my thing. That's what I really love to do. And so you're like, okay, whatever. Okay. So, but our thing that we're really fighting for right now, and that might be if you're comfortable speaking up at your CAC, if you just want to go in and talk to your principal, if you want to go to a board meeting, or if you're just, the only thing you're comfortable is at a wine night, bringing this up to a couple of your friends. Like there's so many different ways that you can spread the word and really have valuable impacts. So the main thing right now is that the sex ed, which is the new, well, it's all sex ed, but it's the grades 3 through 8 is the one that now is LGBTQ inclusive and comprehensive. So that for this year, people need to sign opt-in for that. They are not going to get it. Their kids are not going to get it. Their students, whoever, are not going to get it unless they check that opt-in. And then another thing that the district has been sharing with the shack that I've had the privilege of seeing is the K through 2 now has inclusive and comprehensive sex ed. I hate to call it sex ed because it's not it's not super sexy, but it's very much more of just health in terms of your emotional health and your physical health. So it's just a comprehensive health, but it does get in the idea of gender and identity. It's critical lessons, and the shack has approved them. But now, thanks to this House Bill 1525, that curriculum, as well as any new sex ed curriculum throughout Texas, has about 5 more hurdles that they have to go through in order to get approved. It has to go through the shack twice, I think, and have mega public comment. It needs to go then through the school board, I believe, twice. And the link that I sent to the AISD site actually goes through all of this in detail. This I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I love having parents have adequate time and opportunities to get informed and be able to provide feedback. That I think is awesome. I have no problem with that. I just have worked with these, or I guess kind of against these people for long enough to know the intention is to just make more opportunities for there to be the smallest error that they can use legal loopholes to stall. And so just know that when we're saying that, oh, there's all these things, these hurdles you have to do, it's not that there's hurdles and that we don't want transparency, that we want transparency. The lessons are up at that website where I posted the link to. AISD has all the lessons available. The K through 2 lessons are still in revision, but they will be available. All the survey results about what parents said and guardians and community members said that they wanted in terms of sex ed are all publicly available. Nothing is hidden here. Even back before it was available online, every school's library has hard copies of the lessons available for people to look at any time. So that's amazing. I think I want the more parents to know and have access to knowing about what's in all of these lessons. But just know that the intention is not for parents to be informed. It's for there to be the smallest legal, the minutes weren't recorded properly at one of the meetings, and now the vote is not valid. That's basically what they're going to be doing. But we're going to need a lot of people speaking up in support of that K-2, because if we thought 3 through 8 was going to be dramatic, teaching the little K-2 kids what a penis is going to blow some minds, and getting proper body part names and those types of things, and talking about the idea of identity in terms of gender is going to be one for the antis to really get their people up. And it, again, it is not community members necessarily. They will bring in busloads from other school districts. Most of the people who show up to these meetings and speak up, they do not have kids in the school district. I know for sure based on an age demo. They might have grandkids, but I think that is even a stretch. And that is the hardest part. And that's why I feel like speaking up in any capacity is so important, because working parents do not have time to show up and wait for 3 hours at a school board meeting to speak for 2 minutes, or now it's actually probably 1 minute that they get to do it. And parents of trans kids certainly don't feel comfortable putting a bullseye or target on their kids as far as speaking up for them. So the most that we can use either our privilege in terms of time and schedule flexibility, as well as, term dog in a fight is such a crude way of putting it, but when I do not have kids who are impacted personally by these laws, these rules, it gives me a barrier of safety that some parents don't have when going out to speak. So I just encourage all parents, don't wait till your kid comes out or their best friend comes out to care now, because these kids deserve to be cared about, whether they're one of yours or not. That's all I have to say.
Susan, I was trying to unmute, but it would not let me. Yes, to all of that. I also want to point out my own appreciation for AASD publishing all of that curriculum online. As a former parental figure and hopefully a soon-to-be parent, having all of that available online is great. The other thing that you will notice, and I'm sure my fellow people here on the panel will acknowledge, we're the only ones that read it. The other side tends to show up and makes up stories about something they haven't read. So, highly encouraged that you reach out. I also, Suzanne, I love this idea, and we need to work on this separately. We don't have to do this on this call because that's inappropriate. But I love the idea of like a kindergartner or a first grader like looking down and going, oh, I didn't notice that there before. It's like they don't know that it's there. So dumb. Sarah, what issues are you working on either as a parent or in your context and in the context of your role here at Out Youth to improve schools?
So I will say, to Suzanne's point, I think I'm just so thrilled. Suzanne and Ashley, like, just having allies is so important to, be able to go to these school board meetings, to be able to go to the Capitol, to be able to, speak truth to power and fight these fights, because particularly through this last legislative session, I can tell you, like, community members and, parents of trans kids are tired. And it's like such an emotionally draining thing to have to do this time and time again. And so I just cannot express my appreciation for both of y'all enough for being, you know, parents who don't necessarily have a kid in the LGBTQIA community that you know of, but you're still fighting for these issues. And so I just wanted to express my appreciation. And I wanted to say that, you know, something we're working on right now as an agency is a pilot. And I will say for anybody out there watching this, it's just a pilot right now. We'll release more information about it after the pilot's done in December, but we're having a pilot program, which is a peer-to-peer mentoring program for caregivers of trans youth. And so a part of that curriculum and what we're, you know, talking to the mentors about is, you know, talking to folks about how to be an advocate and like what you're comfortable with and what your kiddo is comfortable with. I think both of those are really important questions. And so that's one thing we're working on right now is just really giving parents that one-on-one support, but doing it with a figure who has already walked through some of this journey. So that's one thing we're working on. We are also going to relaunch a program that's a support group for parents this coming fall. So we're going to do a 6-week program for caregivers of trans youth. So we'll have some information about that on our social media sometime this week or next week. So I think a big thing is just parents being able to support one another and talk about tips and tricks for advocating for their youth, for advocating for change at the school district level or at the school level, and also just doing that in a way that feels safe and comfortable. So those are some of the things that we're working on just to provide that kind of individualized and group support for parents to support them in their own advocacy journey.
I love that we're doing that in spite of COVID. Stupid COVID. See, Ashley, who have been and who are your best allies in the fights that you've had at your kids' school or at the district level? And did anyone show up that surprised you?
My best allies, I would say, are the women who are part of the Round Rock Black Parents Association with me in leadership. They have all been very instrumental in helping me find my voice and helping me to advocate. And we're all kind of, we like to use the word infiltrate. So we're all trying to infiltrate spaces that we would normally not be a part of, such as PTAs, such as the campus advisory committees. And then to see certain school board members in Round Rock ISD be a part of the conversation and being allies as well. I'm greatly appreciative of those people. We're trying to get things done. I was actually messaging a friend earlier today saying, hey, we need to get Pride Week celebrated in elementary schools. And so we're about to run with that idea and try to get it done here in Round Rock. And yeah, so I'm just really excited. Those are the women that I call my tribe. And I'm glad to have a tribe of women that are willing to work with and be advocates as well with me and allies to the LGBTQIA community.
Yeah, we cannot underestimate the power of not doing it alone. I think many of us, especially who grew up in marginalized communities, marginalized identities, get to feeling that we're the only one. I know that I was definitely one of those kids that was like, I am definitely the only queer person on the planet. And I was like, oh wait, maybe I'm not. And now I work at Out Youth, and now it's hard to avoid. Like they're just everywhere. Sarah, who has shown up as an ally in your work? Who have you been surprised by?
So I guess I'll say on a, personal level, kind of switching back to that hat, I mentioned kind of our family's journey, starting when our kiddo was in preschool and through the early elementary ages. I will say that a lot of the parents of her peers have been really supportive. And, we're sort of in a more suburban enclave in Austin. And so weren't quite sure how those fellow parents would react, or if, we'd face any outright, I don't want my kid to have a play date with your family. I don't want my kid to, have a sleepover at your house. And we've just been really lucky to encounter none of that and just have a lot of support from the general community, which has been really lovely to see. And it makes us just feel more safe about sending our kiddo to school and the school environment there, because we know some of those parents are really supportive. And yeah, generally speaking, I would say just another shout out to allies as we do some of this advocacy work. It's just really nice to see folks who are just really committed to justice in an intersectional way, realizing that homophobia, transphobia, racism, they all intersect. And so really just having folks who have understandings of those issues and see them holistically, and also can be allies in this work in general, has just been really lovely to see.
And Suzanne, your unlikely allies.
My unlikely allies. Well, ones that you might be kind of surprised about, and I'm not sure if people are aware, the AISD, so the Austin Independent School District, has within AISD their own inclusion group that works on inclusion efforts. And then I'm specifically honored to be included as part of the LGBTQ inclusion group. And so that is the team that works on, in particular, the Pride activities. So like I said, a couple years ago, I ran into the issue of my daughter's school just kind of trying to quietly not do Pride, even though it was a district initiative. And so by bringing that up to the school board, I kind of got flagged in a good way by this group to be like, okay, what can we do? Do you want to try to help us? So like I said, getting those pride packs out to 138 schools, I think, so that every school has a pride flag. They have a district pride banner. No one has any excuse not to be able to put up the flag, because we have delivered, well, they came and picked them up, but we have packaged them and handed them off to them, like little tattoo stickers. This year it was the masks. They had pride masks at the school. They had virtual like for your Zoom, they had virtual backgrounds, pride backgrounds. They had virtual things that you could do for your social media. And that's something that the district put together. I mean, I cannot take credit for an Informed Parents of Austin. I was invited to just be part of the group to help do that and spread the word. But that's the district doing that. So that's a great thing. And that is the step one that I think that we have in our district, that not every district has the fortune of having. So that's those are great allies to have. They're the ones that are making the decisions. But I would say on the individual school level, I have found that the secret heroes of pretty much every school are the counselors and the librarians. And the librarians are ones that I think are the most open to you saying, hey, do you know which book we need to make sure is in the library? And, maybe we can do a fundraiser for that, or maybe I can just bring you a copy. We'll just add it in there. So I would say, and I mean, that's not universal across all schools, but I would say for the most part, and especially that the district group that I was saying that I participate in, a lot of librarians and counselors in that group. So that gives me a lot of hope in the school. But going back to this idea that like no act is too small, and that everybody has different things that they're comfortable in being an ally. Some people, they don't want to speak up, but they're happy to wear a pin, or they're happy to wear a sticker, an ally sticker. Some people don't have time, but they do have money. Some people don't want to speak, but they'll write letters and postcards all day long. And so I just say that keep sharing opportunities to participate in all different ways with people, even if they haven't participated in the last 9 or 10 things that you've brought to them. You never know which one is going to be, hit their check marker, their thing that they feel comfortable and equipped to do. So I would just say there's kind of these little secret allies that you just never know about. Like, we were doing a bus driver appreciation thing during the freeze, and people that I hadn't heard of in a while, we put it on the informed parents too, because we're like, oh, we're well, we got a lot of captive parents here, we'll bring it up. And people I hadn't heard of in some places, like, they were like, oh, driving to the bus or doing this or going and gathering food, like things that have to do with food or things that touch their heart and that they're willing to do, which we've never had a food ask before in informed parents of Austin. So that was something that they were ready to do. So you just never know what's going to be that act of kindness and community that that ticks the mark for somebody. So yeah, that's everybody can be an ally if you give them the right action that they can take and make it really easy for them.
Yeah, I cannot emphasize that enough. The only wrong thing to do is nothing. And when I teach about allyship professionally, I always bring in my old friend, Ms. Frizzle, who had that magic school bus. Every time she would take everyone on that adventure, which allyship is often an adventure, she always reminds everyone, we're going to take chances, we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to get messy. The piece that she always left out, though, was the part about where you clean it up after, cleaning up after yourself. So speaking of teachers, Sarah, have you ever pushed for any kind of professional development for educators at your kiddo's school? If so, how did you do it? What was the response?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, again, this points to why allies such as Suzanne and Ashley are so helpful. I think in my family personally, we've had to balance, being very passionate about these topics and advocates in my professional life. I'm literally like gay for a living, like, working at Out Youth. Like, there's a lot of visibility that I have in these spaces. And we had to sort of think about, if we do some of this direct advocacy, is it going to out my partner? And is it going to cause things that are really difficult for our kiddo at some point? So I will say we have done some of the gentle things, like we mentioned, like encouraging teachers to, separate kids by eye color and not by gender, for example. And we've done some advocacy in sort of other areas around, just more general topics around social emotional learning and diversity, equity and inclusion. And so again, I really applaud the allies who can do some of that more direct advocacy, because it's really safe for them to do so. And so that's kind of our family and our story to this point. So, it's also hard when you have kind of a younger elementary school age kid who's still, trying to figure out all these things about our family. And so not wanting to put that extra pressure on her to like have to teach everybody about everything, that just doesn't feel right quite yet. Although is a pretty outspoken little human, so I don't know if we'll be able to keep that energy in a bottle for very much longer. And so we'll see how it goes as we move forward. But I did want to mention that it was really lovely because my kiddo's third grade teacher on their like blend page where they have themselves as like a Bitmoji did have like a rainbow, like everybody is welcome sort of digital background. And that just made us feel so, comfortable and happy that was going to be, our kiddo's third grade experience and was going to have a teacher like that. So I'm glad that the district's putting those things into place. And I think, even though it seems like it might be a little thing, like for those of us who are a part of the community, it's a big deal.
Go to our allies. Ashley, Same question. Any kind of professional development for teachers at your school that you've been able to push for? Anything that you would like to push for? How might it be received?
So we haven't pushed for any type of professional development just yet. We were kind of trying, especially with them being elementary, trying to ease them into it, I guess you can say. And so what we started with last year was creating book lists every month for families to read, and also sending that to teachers as well for them to read, and what corresponds with that month. And so one month we did families, and we did all types of families for our books. So it wasn't just the same heteronormative families we always see, but we wanted to make sure that every family was highlighted. And by doing that, my daughter's kindergarten teacher actually read some books from our book list as well to the class. And so, just I think it's the small steps, one little step at a time, that'll help make the changes that need to be made. And this year, though, my goal is to push for even more. I like to give a little teaser and then hit them with the 1-2 and get them to do a little bit more. So this year, I'm going to ask for a GSA alliance within the school, so that teachers who are a part of the community can also link up with students and mentor in that way if they can, and be support systems for the students who are starting to come into their own. And hopefully the school will go for it. we will see. It's a lot of pushing. I do know that.
Frederick has weighed in the chat saying that they are super excited to help you with that. As a general aside, it is generally illegal for a school to deny a request to start a Gender and Sexuality Alliance club. There are some instances where they are legally allowed to, but at least in all the years I've done this, there's only ever been one school that was actually structured in a way that they technically could. So looking forward to seeing that on your campus, Ashley. And Suzanne, what kind of professional development have you pushed for, or do you want to push for when it comes to teachers at ASD?
So much. In fact, one of the very first things that kicked off 4 years ago, the formation of the Informed Parents of Austin, was I told you that people wouldn't show up to the PTA meetings, and they would literally try to bribe them with food and donuts and coffee and whatever. There were so few people showing up that I would actually go and Facebook Live them and then videotape them and upload them, so at least people, because I mean, they're during the day. The working parents, working guardians can't get to those. So we wanted to make them available to all. So I started videotaping these things. And of course, the one I started with was when our principal came and was talking about how they were going to start doing professional development with HRC's welcoming schools at our school. And a select group of vocal parents proceeded to just blow their minds with the idea that they didn't understand that it was professional development. It wasn't a student curriculum, and I cannot imagine why anyone would ever have it in their mind that it's bad for teachers to be prepared to have really thoughtful responses when kids have complicated questions about sexuality or gender or being bullied or race or anything. Or a big thing at that time was also citizenship, especially in Texas, and citizen status. So that went away. It went away. They worked. They threw their fit, and it went away. I am serving also on the board of GLSEN right now, which I know does education for educators. And I know I had that privilege of seeing during our last Pride event. I know Out Youth has some really great educator training materials as well that I believe AISD is going to be using. I would hope that other school districts would also, hopefully that they can be a lead to that and show the successes that AISD has, so that other school districts like Round Rock and other in the area will see how fabulous it is. And and pick up on that as well. But I mean, the fact is, whether it be Out Youth or Glisten or any of the other HRC, whatever group offers education for educators to be able to be better prepared to answer complicated but not complicated questions, but we make them complicated by not knowing how to answer them. I just think that the more the better, and I'm so supportive of making sure that those education resources are available, not just to teachers, but to after school programs, to bus drivers, to the cafeteria workers, to the janitorial staff. There needs to be a safe touch point literally in every point along a kid's day, from the second they get on the bus to if they're walking down the hallway, making sure that anyone that they encounter is going to be a welcoming, supportive part of their day.
Yes, and a gigantic shout out and thanks to Frederick for spearheading the development of Be a Beacon at Out Youth. It has been long in the works. And to Suzanne's point, it is part of AISD's now required employee training. All employees that are adults at AISD, regardless of their job title, must take at least level 1 of Be a Beacon. So very proud to have achieved that. At the same time, we are also firmly in the camp that any professional development for teachers is good professional development, except when Concerned Parents of Austin, I'm assuming, is going to roll out some sort of unwelcoming schools curriculum. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them. So I'm going to put that on the back burner. Ashley, what advice do you have for other parents, guardians, or caregivers when they have concerns or want to make changes in their kids' school?
I will say that I know it can be daunting. When I first started advocating for my daughter, I thought about what if there's any type of repercussions? What if there's any type of retaliation because I'm so vocal? But then I realized that won't matter in the long run because she'll see that I'm pushing for her. And that's what she needs to see, that her mom is doing something for her. And so I'd rather deal with retaliation in a moment than to have her disappointed in me for a lifetime. And that's what I had to think about. And so I would advise anyone who has that fear to know that your child is looking up to you and know that they're appreciating you in this moment and knowing that you are doing your best for them. And that's all that you can ask for. That's all that they need to see as well, that love that you have for them. And so keep pushing for your kids, no matter what.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm going to give the youth side of that as well, since I have the distinct pleasure and privilege to work with our youth. That is all they want. They don't want, they would love if their parents did it perfectly. No parent is perfect. And most of our kids understand that. What they want is for their parents to care, to do the thing, no matter how small, to show that they care. Which is a great segue into Sarah. Same question for you, professionally, first, if you don't mind, and then personally. What do you have as a professional who works in schools have to say to parents who want to advocate for things that would make their kids and other kids' lives better?
Yeah, I think my answer is a little bit the same for both kind of personal and professional. It's something I referenced earlier, is both doing kind of the grassroots cultural work at your individual school level while also pushing for structural change and training at the district level. So for example, having Be a Beacon be in schools, fighting for that inclusive sex ed curriculum, making sure that we're advocating for school district policies to be as inclusive as possible, while also doing your best just to, try and influence the culture of your kiddo's school in any way you can. I did remember a story after the last question of, supervising my kiddo doing a digital virtual school last year, and a teacher saying like he or she is doing blah, blah, blah. And my kiddo was like, or they and them? Or they and them, like very, very insistent about non-binary inclusion. And God bless the teacher, like rolled with it and like realized, like was aware enough to know like, oh yes, like some people do use they, them pronouns. And so I think just doing those little things or making sure that there's some awareness at the campus level while also pushing for kind of policies and structural change is really important.
Thanks, Sarah, especially for creating that example for your kiddo. And also, not a surprise, having met both you and your partner, that apple may still be firmly attached to the tree for all we know, and hope so for a long time. Suzanne, what advice do you have for other parents, guardians, or caregivers?
Yes, I just want to echo again that like no act is too small, except for not doing anything, like you said. But do what's in your comfort, and then maybe like a baby step out of your comfort level, and you'll be surprised how much that starts adding on as you try one more thing. If you're not willing to go speak at a SHAC meeting, start at the CAC, your Campus Advisory Council meeting. And I would say, as far as where to make changes and where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, if you're only willing to go speak or talk at one thing, is those CAC meetings. I would say, as far as the intimidation factor, it's a smaller group. Like I said, not too many people go to it. So if you're worried about the audience size, it's a pretty private and intimate gathering. And it's the place where the ears there are going directly to the principal of your school. So I highly advise people to learn about their CAC. Maybe, the first couple of meetings, just go and just sit and just listen and get a feel for what it's like before, if you're not quite comfortable in speaking, hear how some of the other people go and speak, and hear how they talk about what they talk about, and talking to your principal even, or just sending them an email. I know it may feel really silly and like common sense, I mean, out of the blue, to send your principal an email and say, hey, I really support inclusive sex ed. But I can guarantee you there are complete campaigns and initiatives by the other side to bombard that same principal, to bombard the board members with letters saying the other thing, or saying the opposite side. And I got to tell you, like, I'm going to keep on talking about the AISD survey, and that link I put in earlier has a link to the survey results as well. You can look at every national sex education standard area, from sexually transmitted diseases to identity. You can look at every single part, and 95% plus, most of them are 97, 98% of parents are supporting. So the fact is, we assume that, since we're so 98%, obviously things are going to go our way. But when it's only that 5% that's speaking up, they look like the 100%. And that is what we're running into. We get a little laissez-faire here in Austin, thinking like, oh, we're the little blue dot in all of Texas and we're safe here, and we are not. And as safe, quote unquote, as our district seems right now, I mean, we're just one shack board upheaval away from having a bunch of concerned people. And I mean, that is why they are making all these new laws. There's a lot of new laws that affect shack boards, because they are trying to find any technicality to have to. Our board has been dissolved at one time, because there was one technicality of a way that a certain parliamentarian rule wasn't being followed. And yes, there are rules that need to be followed, but they have a lot of lawyers in their group, and they spend a lot of time trying to find anything through the Public Records Acts by trying to, they will go to any teacher, administrator, request all of their emails, try to find any way that they can take them down. They will try to find any way that, you know, like I said, the meeting minutes for a particular meeting weren't recorded properly, so that any vote that happens there is null and void. So just know that in order for our 95% voices to be heard, we actually have to say something. And we can't just assume that somebody else is doing it. And it really can just be that conversation or an email to your principal if you don't feel comfortable doing the board members. But I got to tell you, after you start sending stuff to the principal, you're going to be ready for the CAC. You're going to be ready for the board. You might end up at the Capitol during the next session. You never know, because once you see you can do it in one place, you know that you can do it in others, and how important it is for your voice to be heard.
Thanks, Suzanne. There is a follow-up question. Are CACs specific to AISD, or is it something that most districts or all districts in Texas might have in their schools?
I know that shacks are for every single district, and I believe that CACs are the same way. I should know this. But yeah, I believe that that is something that every school district, or well, it's not, I'm sorry, it's not even a school district, it's the individual schools themselves. The CAC is the Campus Advisory Council for the principal. It's similar to how the shack is the advisory to the school board as far as health and curriculum is involved. They're kind of the same thing, but on a much smaller scale up to the principal, and it's not just limited to health.
Yeah, and I want to say that it is statewide as well, and let's just hedge our bets and say if it's not, start one.
Exactly.
Email your principal and say, we need a CAC.
I would like to start a CAC.
So thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to Frederick to wrap us up for today, and make sure to point out your session on Friday.
Yes, definitely. Thank you all so much for joining us. I did want to add just a couple of things to this session today. One of the more unique ways that you can get involved in schools is by actually being one of the people to influence the TEKS, which are the, Suzanne, help me out, Texas Education and Knowledge Standards.
I think you got it.
So basically what students are expected to learn. In Texas, we call them the TEKS. Those are revised periodically. The sex ed standards that Suzanne was talking about were revised for the first time last year for the state. It was the first time they were revised since 1997, when Titanic was in theaters, for some perspective. And I didn't learn about the process in time to actually be on the committees that were doing the revision, but I was part of an observer group. And so a lot of different organizations set up observation to where they can report back to statewide organizations that are doing advocacy work to let them know how it looks like things are going. And so Texas Freedom Network was the organization that I was advocating or observing with. And they have a campaign called Teach the Truth, which is their sex ed campaign. But this process happens for all different kinds of TEKS updates. And so it also happened over the past year for science and for things like climate change. And so if we know that Texas, the way Texas teaches history isn't always accurate. So if accurate history lessons are something that are important to you, the next time that the history TEKS are being revised, if you want to try and get in on those committees that actually write the curriculum and what students are expected to learn, there are ways to get involved in that. I was also on the committee with the TEA, the Texas Education Agency, this couple weeks ago to cross-check the educational materials against the updated sex ed standards. And so once the TEKS are updated and those go through, then the publishers have the process of revising and updating the textbooks, and now it's all digital materials, to make sure that those are in line with the standards. And so I was on one of the committees that was cross-checking those things to make sure that they were all matching up. And so there are a lot of different ways to get involved. And so if you're really nerdy, that's a fun way to get involved, because it's clearly my jam.
Frederick, I'm going to jump in real quick. I forgot to mention this after Suzanne spoke. Sex ed is something that we are very committed to ensuring is available and fully accessible and inclusive to youth. Because that is very difficult to do in Texas, one of the things that we do offer at OutYouth as part of our drop-in curriculum, our drop-in program curriculum, we invite in our friends from Planned Parenthood once a month to teach, hey, health education for youth. And so Joan joins us once a month for our teens, 13 to 17. We are also going to have Joan join us this fall for our preteens, 9 to 12. So if you are listening and are a parent and want your kiddo to have more inclusive sexual health education, feel free to check out outyouth.org/drop-in to find out times and ways to join.
Absolutely. And one of the other pieces of that, as Rin alluded to, I am doing a Q+EDU session this Friday called Finding Inclusive Professional Development, where folks will get a sneak peek of the Be a Beacon curriculum that OutYouth developed, as well as resources for finding inclusive professional development for educators on things like racism and ableism and anti-Semitism. And all of those things, as well as some wonderful sex ed resources like Planned Parenthood, Unhushed, and the Unitarian Universalist curriculum, Our Whole Lives, or OWL. So all those things will be there. And then I will tell you more about the other Q+EDU sessions that are coming up this week as well in just a minute. But I also wanted to do a plug for the session that is going to close out Q+EDU 2021 on the 27th of August. It is called Call Email Lobby, advocating for the LGBTQIA2+ community with your elected officials. And that will feature our partners at Texas Freedom Network, at the Transgender Education Network of Texas, the ACLU of Texas, as well as our special guest, Lindsay Horvath, the mayor of West Hollywood, California, one of the gayest cities in the world. So definitely join us for that. And then this week, what else do we have this week? Tomorrow's session is an intergenerational chat between bisexual men. Yes, they do exist. They will be here with us tomorrow. And then on the 12th, on Thursday, our student leaders from across the state are going to come together and talk about their regional coalition work within the state, because Texas is huge. So if you are interested in learning about GSAs and how we organize across the state as big as Texas, that's a great session to come to. So thank you all so much for joining us. We very much appreciate your time and brilliance, and your allyship and your effort and advocacy, all of it. Thank you so much. And y'all have a wonderful night.